But welcome to the Casco Bay Coastal Academy workshop for fall 2021. Today we're talking about the Community Intertidal Data Portal. My name is Madeline Tripp. I'm filling in for Victoria Bounty because she wasn't able to make it today, and we're also missing one of our presenters, Sarah Mills-Knapp. So we're filling in the gaps, but I think we'll still have the chance for a great conversation and get to share a few things and learn a few things. So I think we'll start with a short poll to see who we have in the room. So Harold, if you could launch that. And then while people are filling that out, can continue with the introduction. So in case you haven't attended a Casco Bay Coastal Academy workshop before, it's a quarterly series that's put on by the Casco Bay Estuary Partnership, the New England Environmental Finance Center, the Cumberland County Soil and Water Conservation District, and the Greater Portland Council of Governments. It's designed for municipal staff and committee members to help share resources and discuss important coastal issues, and also to share science-based information about natural resources. And so today the focus, as you probably already know, is the Community Intertidal Data Portal, which is a set of data tools that are under development by the Casco Bay Regional Shellfish Working Group and the Greater Portland Council of Governments. We'll have a background on the data portal because a lot of you may be wondering what it is and what it may look like. And that'll be a brief presentation, and then we'll discuss how it relates to the work that you do and have demos of 3 data products that we have prepared. They're draft example data products, so please keep that in mind as you go through the demos, and then we'll have breakout rooms to discuss in more detail each of the example data viewers. But we'll get to that in a minute. I just wanted to bring up that, or share the results of our registration question. Oh, and the poll results just came back in. So it looks like we have a lot of community volunteers. So I'm guessing that's a lot of volunteer committee members, municipal boards and municipal staff. So it looks like we have a good spread of people today. And according to the responses from your registration answers, it looks like there's a lot of overlap between your focus areas and the map viewers that we have to look at today. Some of the takeaways included a lot of interest in water quality, stormwater, and shellfish focused, climate resilience, and various planning initiatives, whether that's local or regional, related to climate resilience or coastal conservation. So it seems like we'll have a lot to discuss. So with that, I'll get us started with some very brief introductions. Maybe the Casco Bay Coastal Academy planning team could start off, and I'll just say I'm Madeline, and I was a part of the Greater Portland Council of Governments initial resilience cohort that I just finished up, and now I'm working with Untitled Bay Consulting and have been on the planning team for the Coastal Academy for a little bit. And I'll hand it off to maybe Harold.
Thanks, Madeline. Harold Spetla, the planner at Greater Portland Council of Governments.
Chloe, would you like to go? And maybe hand it off to...
Sure. I'm Chloe Shields. I'm a program manager with the New England Environmental Finance Center, and we're one of the core partners in the Academy. And also my colleague Martha Shields is here if she wants to say hello.
Hi, everybody. I'm Martha Shields. I'm the director of the New England Environmental Finance Center. I'm keeping my camera off because I'm feeling under the weather today, so apologies. But thanks for coming and having us here.
And last but not least, Damon.
Hi, I'm Damon Yakovlev, Environmental Planner at Cumberland County Soil and Water Conservation District.
Perfect, thanks, Damon. And now we'll introduce the team developing the data portal. I've been a part of that process, and I've been working with Jessica Joyce, who's here. Maybe you can introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jessica Gribben Joyce. I have my own business, Title Bay Consulting, and I also convene the Casco Bay Regional Shellfish Working Group, and I am the project manager for the Community Intertidal Data Portal. And Judy, go ahead.
I'm Judy Colby George. I have a consulting firm, Spatial Alternatives, and I do a lot of mapping for municipalities in the area, and I'm the person making the maps.
Perfect, thanks, Judy. So I'll hand it off to Jessica to get us started with the presentation and the agenda for today.
Thanks, Madeline.
Recording in progress.
I'm going to go ahead and review the agenda for today. We just covered the first part of that. And next, we'll go into some really brief presentations just to give you some background about how the Community Intertidal Data Portal came to be and what the focus and applications are for this tool. Then Judy will give us a demonstration of 3 of these test data products, and then we'll get a chance to go into breakout rooms where you can choose which of the 3 data products you'd like to really dig into, give us feedback on what additional features you'd like to see on those, or what other products you would like to see around a particular topic or issue. Then we'll get back into our plenary and share out some feedback from those groups and wrap up and adjourn by 4:30. Next slide, please. As Madeline said, there are many organizations involved in this project. And I'm just going to start by sharing some information about the shellfish community who initially came up with the idea for this data portal. Shellfish are of great importance in Casco Bay, both ecologically, from water purification, protection from shoreline erosion and nutrient cycling, but also economically. And I just wanted to point out the graph here that in 2019, over $8 million in landed softshell and hardshell quahogs. And this isn't even all the different kind of wild shellfish. It does include some aquaculture landings, but there's few of these species that are grown commercially for aquaculture. And this represents for quahogs or hardshell clams, over about 75% of the state landings are from Casco Bay. Soft shells represent about 25% of the state landings. And while these numbers were down to about 6 million in 2020 because of the pandemic, I do think that they'll rebound again in 2021 because prices have been very high this year. Culturally, they're also important. Thousands of years ago, the Wabanaki relied on shellfish, and shellfish middens have even been found in Casco Bay and Broad Cove in Cumberland. Shellfish management started back in the 1640s with the Colonial Shellfish Ordinance, and I'll talk a little bit later that we're still under what is now kind of referred to as this home rule, where the municipalities have the authority over shellfish along with the state. Next slide. There are a number of issues facing the fishery, and I'm not going to detail all of these, but as you can see, there are cumulative effects impacting the sustainability of the wild shellfish populations, as well as access to the fishery and intertidal from licensing and simply just access points to the intertidal. The towns and states, as I mentioned, are tasked with co-managing the fishery. And the nexus for this project is really the last bullet here, in that there's limited accessible information for conservation and management for some municipalities. Next slide. So to address these issues, we formed the Casco Bay Regional Shellfish Working Group in 2019. The vision is a healthy intertidal ecosystem that sustains shellfish resources and the jobs that depend on these fisheries. And our mission is to collaboratively address pressing issues facing the wild harvest shellfish community and share expertise and best practices for management, conservation, research, and monitoring across towns and stakeholders in Casco Bay. Along with Madeline, we also convene this group with Manamet and currently Marissa McMahon. So I'm going to turn it over now to Madeline to talk about the Community Intertidal Data Portal, which actually was an idea that came from one of the first working group meetings back in 2019. Go ahead, Madeline.
Thanks, Jessica. So like Jessica was saying, the data portal came about from a working group meeting, and it initially was to share data and information between municipalities and municipal shellfish committees to help inform their management decisions. But then we quickly realized that intertidal data is useful for a wide range of stakeholders, and that the audience could be broadened a lot. So I'm stepping in for Sarah for these few slides, and Sarah is from the Greater Portland Council of Governments, which is our main partner in this project. And as you probably know, GPCOG is a regional convener and wants to grow its role as a regional collaborator and also as a data clearinghouse for its member communities. And so just to continue on with the data portal, we realized that intertidal data could be useful for a broad range of people, and not just to inform the management of wild shellfish populations and support harvester jobs, but also to address a lot of other issues that GPCOG and its member communities are dealing with, like informing climate change adaptation action planning, and also supporting access, development, and conservation questions that have really far-reaching impacts for our communities. And so we expanded the focus of this data portal to include like data viewers that would address those issues as well and incorporate their stakeholders' needs. And the data portal I'll talk a little bit more about this in a later slide, but we'll combine where available intertidal data into like more digestible and actionable formats so that the layperson can understand this data and put it to use. So first, the goals of the data portal include to help inform municipal coastal planning. Oh dear, sorry. To help inform municipal coastal planning and climate change adaptation with a focus on the intertidal ecosystem and shellfish conservation. And then we also have a secondary goal to inform research and monitoring in the intertidal zone, and to inform research priorities, citing for municipal conservation projects and long-term monitoring. So, but to dig into what the data portal actually will be, we want it to be very specific, targeted data tools to address discrete like management questions and focuses that our stakeholders have, which includes you. So things that conservation committees need to know about the intertidal, or that planners need to know for climate change adaptation planning. So some of the future data products that focuses that we came up with from our outreach so far include a shellfish restoration one focused on coastal permitting, one focused on coastal comprehensive planning, or one focused on identifying key conservation areas. So just to give a brief overview of the outreach that we've done so far, we initially did a survey of the shellfish community and had broad support for creating the data portal. 76% people strongly supported creating this tool. And when we expanded our stakeholder or our audience this summer, we also did a survey of municipal staff and committees involved in coastal planning. And now we're filling in those gaps with events like this one, where we can get more details from folks that we didn't reach with the surveys, to find out more about like what specific questions do people want answered and what data would be useful to be able to view in one place. And our geographic scope is just focused on Casco Bay right now, but this data portal could be a template for larger regional or statewide data portals. So now I'm going to hand it off to Judy to give a demonstration so that you can like really see what we're talking about, because I know it's difficult when we're just talking about the concept of data portals and data dashboards and things like that. So.
Sorry, I forgot I was muted. So thanks, Madeline. So again, just a reminder that this is in its infancy. Like we're just pulling things together and starting to put things in. So none of this work is completed, but we wanted you to be able to see and experience it, some examples, so that it would help people to think about what would be useful. So eventually this will be the portal, and you'll be able to get data classified in different categories and applications. And so right now what we have are 3 different applications that we've created. And what we did is try to do that in a way that would allow you to see the different types of data, the different ways we can present and visualize data. So one is what we call a story map, one is a data entry web app, and one is a dashboard. And those have they're 3 similar but related, but slightly different ways of thinking about the data. So, the story map allows you is really just a way to bring data together and be able to introduce people to a bunch of information and use the maps and pictures and videos and any other kind of content in order for people to understand what's going on in their area. So, and in each of the breakout rooms, we're going to go into specifics about these. So I'm just going to introduce them in a very general sense. The ideas of story maps are that you scroll through, and then there's things like slider bars and graphs that you can look at, and maps that should be popping in there. And oh, there it is, it's just slow. And then maps with lots of data that we can then look at and zoom around, and we'll explore that in the breakout room, and we can have pictures and questions, and we can then connect that to, say, a survey. So after people go through it, then we can get people to respond to those ideas. So that's the idea of a story map. In this case, this particular story map is looking at the impacts of sea level rise on the nearshore environment. So that's one option that we have for today. And the next one, I'll do the water quality dashboard next, because it's the most similar. So a dashboard is similar in that you can have text. It doesn't really scroll down. It's sort of a one pager, and then a map. But then you can also add to that lots of different charts and infographics and information that responds to your actions. So in this particular case, if we were to zoom in, you can see that the graph changes to reflect what's visible on the screen. And so it allows you to then explore the data in that way. And you can build, as whatever tables and individual indicators infographics that you want to build into these things. This is where we've gotten so far. It's not where we will end up. And this map is really focused specifically on water quality. And so we have the P90 scores for the whole state in here, but the graph is only referring to these ones that have the little blue dots next to them, because that was the data I had in time for this meeting. But eventually we'll have this kind of data for the whole area. And so that's how dashboards work. So they're really a tool for data visualization, infographics, some information that you can, textual information that you can have, and then it reacts to what you do on the screen. And then finally, the third area that we talked about in our conversations with people was ways to enter data. And so this is a septic study data entry and shoreline survey. So it really accomplishes two goals at once for towns, for shellfish commissions who do shoreline surveys and look for areas where there may be pollution. This would provide a tool that you could use on your phone where you could do a shoreline survey, go out and collect photographs and then make comments where you think that there may be an issue, and be able to track that so that as a community, you can start to look at where you think that there are issues related to water quality in your nearshore environment. And then what we've also provided in this case is I just did a quick analysis of parcels, and we looked at parcels that had houses on them that were more than 30 years old, making the gross assumption that their septics were also more than 30 years old in that case, and were within 500 feet of a water body, so that we could narrow down which parcels were the ones that we wanted to look at. And we're able to then go in and, for one that has some data that I've put in there. So we can draw in where the septic and leach field are so that we can actually have a physical location of those. And then we could do a foot survey where we just walk down the road and we're able to look at sort of the leach field from the road, perhaps in the springtime, and see if there are issues that we want to track in order to help identify failed septic systems that are having an impact on water quality. And then that information can be recorded, and so then if the septic gets replaced, you can reset everything to, now we know when the septic has been replaced. Currently, most places, a lot of this data is in paper folders. And so this would be a really helpful task to get that information out of paper folders and into usable content for more than just the shellfish commissions in towns, but anybody who's worried about water quality and making sure to connect on septic maintenance. So this is an app that I created to use on a desktop so that you could enter this data like if you were sitting in an office, but the same map and data entry form is all ready to be used on an app that would also be able to be installed on your phone or your iPad so that you could go out in the field and collect data right while you were out there. And I think that's as much detail as I think we'll get into before we break into groups, so that everybody will have a chance to, we'll go into more depth as to what the fields are, and then hope to get back from everybody ideas that you have both to enhance and improve these particular viewers, but more importantly, what other information, what other kinds of viewers, what other ways of bringing data together and what other data sets would be useful for people. For instance, on, let's see. Oh yeah, just on this map, one of the data layers that we just created as part of this project was mapping all the docks along the shoreline, which is a data layer that didn't really exist before. It existed in pieces. I know some towns had that information for their specific towns, but now we have that information for a much broader area. So, you know, data layers like that, like suggestions about other things that would be helpful would really help us out and help us to make this product really useful and aid people in understanding the nearshore environment and decision making that has to go on there. So that's it for me.
Thanks, Judy. Yeah, I really want to emphasize the point that we are making this data portal to be used by people like you. So we really, really appreciate any input or ideas that you have for ways that we can make your life easier. So we'll get more into that in the breakout rooms, but I just wanted to open the floor for a second. We just threw a lot of information at all of you. So wanted to open the floor for people to ask questions. If you have a question, please raise your hand and we'll keep an eye out for it and see if we can get you an answer. Oh, I see Maggie. Oh, you're muted. Let me see if I can get you to.
How's that?
Perfect. I can hear you now.
So in the past several years ago, I've been getting some emails and I've heard about something called the Northeast Region Coastal Planning Effort. It's kind of a national and state issue. They have a data portal. It sounds like they've been doing this exactly what you're doing. I know that the Department of Marine Resources are Maine's, they're the representatives for Maine on this national effort. And I wondered if you were connected to that at all.
Jessica, did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I can touch on that, and Judy probably can as well. So I think what you're referring to, Maggie, is the NROC has the Northeast Ocean Data Portal. And they actually, they do collect a lot of data sources. A couple of years ago when I went to a conference, I talked to Tom, who is the, I think, the director of NROC or NERACUS. A lot of organizations merged with that. They don't get that far into the intertidal, and that's similar, and maybe some others can speak to some of the other data products. I was just in a meeting yesterday, and a lot of them are at a larger scale. So the Northeast Ocean Data Portal, I actually used to refer to this when we were fundraising for it as the Northeast Ocean Data Portal for the intertidal. It's the same thing, that we're collecting information that is available in other places, but it's not, it's all in disparate sources. And sometimes you need a GIS license to access that instead of just kind of a public map viewer. And there are a number of other data products and viewers that are out there. And I'll let Judy talk about kind of why ours is different. And part of it is that we want the community to contribute data as well. So not all the data that you want is available out there. And we're looking to work with the communities and through Resilience Corps and others on getting data. Judy, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would say, so, I mean, they've done a spectacular job of gathering a certain scale of data. And I think we're looking at a slightly more refined scale at the very local level. And also their, at least to my understanding of their purpose, is that their purpose is to gather a lot of data. And then they make some thematic maps from it, but they're not really focused on data visualization tools to help people understand that data, right? Their assumption is that you'll be able to download the data and use it however you want to, and that you'll understand what to do with that data. And I think our focus is we want to create some products that answer people's questions with the data and create more knowledge than just raw data.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect, thanks, Maggie. I don't know what order that people raise their hands on, but Alan, you're first on my screen, so.
Thanks, Madeline. Fascinating portal. And one of your early slides mentioned the impact of milky ribbon worms and also green crabs. Are you at the point of tracking, filtering or showing what the impact is of green crabs, for instance, on salt marsh peat and the way green crabs are burrowing in and invading that? Where does that data show up, and well, when will it show up, perhaps is the question.
So we don't currently have that in any of our data viewers, but it could be something that we include. I don't know, Judy, is that data that is currently available?
Not that I know of.
Yeah,
I mean, it doesn't exist.
Sure
It just means I don't know.
Collecting that.
Yep,
but
Madeline, let me step in on that, since we have been tracking some of that. There is no comprehensive data source that I know of addressing anything at that scale. The monitoring of green crab in particular has been relatively episodic. You know, one year you have good data, then you don't have it for a while. You have it in one bay, then you don't have it the next bay over. So it would require some real thinking about what do we want to gather, how do we gather and organize it, and how do we present it in a data viewer. It certainly is the kind of thing that we should be looking at, exactly those kinds of ideas for things that we could layer on top of this and start to look for ways to organize that data collection. That particular example would be very suitable for volunteer data collection, for example.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can add Marissa McMahon at Manomet does green crab monitoring. And while that doesn't get exactly at your question, we are thinking about having one of the map viewers include the green crab monitoring data. She already has about 4, maybe 5 years of data in various sites throughout Casco Bay. So at least that would be an indicator for those areas, if those are of interest. And then we can connect it with some of the research that I know Wells Reserve has done on the impacts to the shoreline from green crabs as well. And maybe that could be a story map example.
Cool.
Thanks, Jessica. And thanks, Alan, for the great question. Let's see, Laura.
Hi, everyone. So I have 2 questions, basically, kind of wrapping back to what Maggie was asking about.
Sorry.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes,
yeah,
we can hear you.
Okay. So I'm wondering if you all are working with the Department of Marine Resources at all, or what data you might be getting from them. And my other question has to do with the funding for this project, if it's all coming from fundraising, or if you're finding, where are you finding sources for it?
Great questions. I think that, so the working group has worked with DMR in the past, and I think that we might be using some of their data and some of our viewers. Yeah, Judy's nodding yes. So that connection is there, and we have a relationship with them from the Shellfish working group. And as far as funding goes, we have a slide later that thanks our sponsors that we received a Maine Coastal Communities grant. And we also have funding from the Island Institute's Shore Up grant program. But we'll touch on that later, but it's all grant funded.
Madeline, I just wanted to add too, we have an advisory committee for this project that I didn't mention. On that, we have Cole Canwett, who is the director of the Bureau of Public Health for the Department of Marine Resources. And her alternate is Ari Leach, who's the biologist, the area biologist for this area. And then we have been actually trying really hard to get someone else from DEP on the Maine DEP on the advisory committee. But in the interim, we've been reaching out to Claire Enterline and a few others just to understand all the data sets that they have available. And then we also have, through the grants, we're pretty well connected with the Maine Municipal Assistance Program and the Maine Coastal Program. So we're pretty well tied in with them, as well as GOPIF, the Governor's Office on Policy Innovation in the Future, who are developing other kind of larger statewide initiatives. So we're in touch with them to make sure that we're not overlapping, and instead we're being complementary of any efforts ongoing at the state.
Great, thank you.
Right, Jeff.
Hi, Madeline. Thank you very much. This has been wonderful for me because it's opened my eyes as a student of sea level rise to not only look at high tide, but also to look at low tide. And so my question for you is, if by the year 2100, for example, the high tide is 4 feet higher than it is now, how high will low tide be relative to now, or will the mudflats always be exposed at low tide?
That's a good question, and one that that our story map touches on. Though we don't have an exact answer for you, but it's something that we've been thinking about, and the story map that we have on sea level rise in the intertidal zone discusses some of the potential impacts of sea level rise on the mudflats and on shellfish populations. But you're right, we have some data on marsh migration, and so that's something that people have looked at and that there's data on, but I don't think in what our search that we've seen any data on how intertidal mudflats will change and where they will shift to. So I think Curtis has something to say about that.
Let me just jump in. The challenge for that right now is that our elevation data for Casco Bay goes back to a LiDAR overflight series that was not done at low tide. And so we actually don't have good elevation data for most of Casco Bay below sort of a quarter to third tide. So the question you've asked has been on our mind since we got that LiDAR data and we realized we couldn't answer it. It's a very good question, and especially the question of what happens to tidal flats as we start to raise sea level. What happens to those tidal flats? To what extent do they butt up against the steep shorelines and disappear? To what extent does what is now tidal marsh start to turn into tidal flats? We just don't have the good elevation data yet for all of our region. I think we're going to get it in the next year or so. I think it's a really, really excellent question, and one that we're going to all have to keep an eye on. Thanks for bringing it up.
Sure. Thank you, Madeline. Thank you, Curtis.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff, and thanks, Curtis, for hopping on. So we're running out of Q&A time, so I might just take one last question before we go to breakout rooms. So we'll have plenty of time to discuss things in small groups. Randall, do you want to?
Thank you, Madeline. Also in Blue Hill, we've been looking more and more at coastal erosion and the impacts of bad riprap. Like to learn more about good riprap. We're talking about, as the state is, living shorelines. Is this going to be mappable as well? And when do you see this kind of data being publishable?
So are you talking about mapping the locations of living shorelines, or data on different types of shorelines?
Yeah,
that's a good question. It's something that we haven't seen, that hasn't been brought up in our outreach so far. But I will say I did a little bit of work for the Casco Bay Estuary partnership on they're creating a living shorelines story map that has more data on living shorelines and the demonstration sites that they're monitoring. But that's a good thought. I think that there's only, there's data on the shoreline type available, but I don't think that there are only 3 demonstration sites so far in Maine, because Maine has a very, an environment that there haven't been a lot of tests with living shoreline sites. And because of the ice and the rocky cliffs that Maine shoreline have, I don't think the techniques have really been totally refined yet. But Jessica, it looks like you want to hop in and say something.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, and I'll try to put the link in before the end of the meeting. I was at a webinar earlier this week, Climate Ready Coast, and I believe that Pete Slovensky developed a map that showed areas that were better for living shorelines than others, and that's a GIS map. So at least you can identify what substrates and what areas of the coast would be candidates, I guess, for living shoreline projects. So I'll try to share that link if I can find it before the end of the meeting. And if it's already a GIS layer from the state, then we can absolutely add that into one of the map viewers.
Yeah, that was, thanks for bringing that up. I forgot about that, but I can send the link. I have it handy to a page. It also, with the Maine Geological Survey, they have more information on living shorelines as well. Okay, so I think we're out of time for Q&A, but now we'll get a chance to have more small group discussions as we break out into breakout rooms. So just to give the rundown on that, we decided to let people choose which breakout room they'd like to hop in on. We have one for each of the example data products that Judy showed all of us earlier. And we also give you the ability to jump into other rooms if you feel like you have learned enough about one data product and want to have a conversation about another one. And we'll have a 15-minute warning to make sure that you have a chance to jump to other rooms if you want to do so. And we'll have some discussion questions and get to have a good chat and get some feedback from each of you. So Harold, would you like to send out the invite for people to choose which room to hop into? Sorry for everyone who got cut off having discussions. I hope that everybody was getting a lot out of their breakout discussions and got the chance to switch between rooms. So since we're out early, we have a little bit more time for facilitators to share out what they were discussing in their rooms. And so we might have 2 to 3 minutes for each facilitator to share, and then also address any outstanding questions about the data viewers after that. And then any additional questions that pop up while we're discussing these, we'll have a moment where people can raise hands and share those and hopefully get those answered. So I can start with the breakout room that I was in. We were discussing the septic system data collection form. And we had a great mix, and let's see, I didn't actually get to all of our discussion questions, but had a lot of great conversation about the need to understand the role that wastewater treatment systems play in water quality and adapting to sea level rise, which doesn't exactly have to do with our breakout room, but still a good thing that was brought up in our discussions. We also discussed that when available, having like soil type information for each, for the parcel data that's being collected for septic systems would be really useful to have to better understand how, if a septic system is failing, how the nutrients are filtering through and being transported to the water bodies. And I don't know, Damon, did you have any other things to add from our conversation as the note taker?
Yeah, I think you covered a lot of it. Also, I think someone brought up an important point that this could be used, applied to some freshwater systems as well, the same type of data portal, such as for lake protection. So that's something to maybe be thinking about. There's sort of good use for this in some of our some of our MS4 communities, and looking at things like failed systems that may apparently be working properly to the homeowner, but are actually being flushed out during each high tide cycle, and so are actually not functioning properly. Someone mentioned that they're looking to put some ARPA funds together to address the wastewater treatment plant, and maybe something like this could help bolster the sort of the grant making process, or maybe the the grant writing process. Yeah, and just a note that there's a lot of places that are permitted that were permitted in the past that would not be today, and so this is a good way to sort of look into that and follow up, and again get at some of these failed septic systems. And one final thing, we talked about the collector app, and like how to get the data into the system, and sort of it's going to take some thought about how to do that properly.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. We got cut off just as we were starting to discuss that, but Curtis had a good point that there, with the septic system collection tool, that there are different levels of data. There's collecting or putting like the paper records from towns about septic systems in a digital format. And then there's also the opportunity for people to collect data about septic systems if they notice an odor or notice different signs of a septic system failure as a citizen, like being able to collect that data, and concerns about having people add data that isn't necessarily correct, or having access to and being able to edit that data. And so we do have that data layer under password protection, and we're figuring out ways to share that in safe and productive ways. So for example, sharing it with a town if they're doing a shoreline survey, and only giving the password access out to edit those layers to certain groups. So I think we took up a lot of time with our group. Jessica, do you want to share out what you all discussed?
Sure. So I facilitated the water quality group, and everyone was so anxious to dive in that we didn't even get to ask the questions that we had posed for the group, but they answered them anyway. So we talked about the first point of saltwater intrusion into our drinking water and groundwater, which is something that actually hadn't brought up yet in our scoping and was a really good thought. And that's actually a question for Judy, because one of our, Parker had mentioned that UNH had done some research and layers on groundwater intrusion, and he thought that Maine Geological Survey was also doing that, but wasn't sure of the status. So that's potential for either a new data dashboard or inclusion into the water quality one with sea level rise and saltwater intrusion. We also had some comments that while P90 is really important for shellfish, that there's a lot of other water quality parameters and monitoring data from Friends of Casco Bay and other organizations that could be overlaid or included in that, to look at also nitrogen, dissolved oxygen, pH, to look at other indicators in the bay. And finally, I think the last one I'll mention is the QA/QC. There was a question of, we're bringing in some layers that have met EPA and other data quality parameters, and some that come from the towns or other sources that may not be. And we talked about definitely being clear on each data set on what the caveats are and whether or not it has been reviewed for quality control. Martha, I'm looking at the notes, but did I leave out anything, or does anyone else from my breakout group want to chime in on something that I may have missed? That was the quick Cliff Notes version.
I can just list, there was a really great download of all the ways that people make decisions, and those topics were related to ocean acidification, water quality data gathering in Casco Bay, green crab and intertidal shellfish, river herring data collection, water quality and testing of intertidal and how it is changing, and for long range planning. Saltwater intrusion got a really great discussion, like you just detailed, Jessica, and multiple data sources overlaid would be very helpful for knowing why there are beach closures. That was also an important point that was reiterated a few times. And is there anyone else in our group that would like to add something that we may have missed?
Oh, you know what, I will mention, because I didn't send the link yet, but I'll put it in the chat. I think that either Maggie or Marianne had asked about microbial source testing as a way to identify pollution sources. And we have some guidance documents on that I will share with everyone shortly in the chat once I get a minute to catch up. So I think that's a wrap. We had a great group. Thank you all for your thoughts. And yeah, we could have talked for much longer.
Thanks, Jessica. I feel like we all feel like that. And just a note, I just put in the chat a link to the data layer that Jessica was talking about earlier about living shoreline sighting. And finally, Judy, do you want to share out what your group talked
Sure,
about?
we had a great group with a variety of interests and a bunch of people who are working in conservation and thinking about mudflats and nearshore environments related to comprehensive planning and things like that. And so we went through the story map. We didn't really get a lot much beyond that, but we did talk about connecting to the terrestrial conservation areas, you know, nearby, which I had put on one of the other viewers, but hadn't added to the story map yet. And so that was, you know, one thing to think about. And then someone else asked a question about road impacts. And I said, well, that, so one of the things we're trying to do is to find all the really cool stuff that everybody's done and put it in a place, right? Because Nature Conservancy a couple of years ago worked on a really great viewer that deals with the impact on roads of flooding and some really great modeling that they did. And so, you know, that's a question about, you know, can we at least have links? We could, in a story map, put a link to Nature Conservancy's website so that people can use that viewer, because that was a huge analysis that that they did, and they really did some amazing, great work on that. So, so that's part of this project, is like trying to find and, you know, bring together all the stuff that's out there. We're completely agnostic to who created it or, you know, why it's there. If it's useful, we want people to know about it, and we want to increase the knowledge so that people have the things they need for decision making. Another thing that came up was thinking about dams and where the dams are in the state. So that would be a good layer that I haven't put on yet, but does exist. And, you know, starting to think about, you know, what will sea level rise mean related to those and, you know, and the communities around them. So, so that's sort of where we got to. We definitely could continue the discussion.
Thanks, Judy. Does anyone else from Judy's group have anything to share or any thoughts? And if not, does anybody have any outstanding questions that they didn't get answered in our breakout groups, or things to share? I see Maggie, you have a hand up.
A question on, I'm thinking about the septic data and the collecting that. Another issue that's come up in our small town is kind of the issue of privacy. You know, you're surveying people's personal property, personal issues, which they may or may not want to address. So there's, you know, there's some social issues involved in that too. And I wondered if you're taking that into consideration.
Yep, and yes, definitely. So all the data that we have looked at gathering is public information. So we aren't gathering anything that's private information. And nor are we suggesting that anybody should walk on anybody's property. Like, these are all things that you can do from either the public side of the water or the road, right? And we're just observing. And then the next step would be to talk to the town staff about, if you think that there's an issue in a particular location, then you would not tell citizens to just randomly start knocking on people's doors and saying, you have a problem. The next thing that would happen would be talking to town staff and having them go and, just discuss with people. Although I will say, when we've done shoreline surveys, people are usually pretty interested in what you're doing. And when they find out what you're doing, they want their water to be clean in front of their house. Not everybody, but many people. And when they find out what you're doing, they're usually quite receptive to understanding what's going on. But there are issues, and I think you have to be cognizant of those issues. And Damon can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but once you know that a septic isn't working, you actually do legally have to fix it. Like, you can't just decide you don't want to deal with it. That's not a choice that can be made, because we've determined that keeping our water clean is important. So, once the town knows about that, they do have to address it. But they have to show that it is actually not working. Like, they can't just, you have to know that it's not working with dye tests or, with looking at the system itself.
Thanks.
And also I'd note, even though property owners and other information are available as public information, we have removed those from as fields from the data collection tool. So that won't be shared publicly.
Right. We took off people's names, the individual names. I mean, if people know, in a small town, people know who lives where. So, but we did take off the names of people, and I think I would continue to do that. Jessica?
Yeah, I know we need to move on to the wrap up, but I briefly just wanted to say too, for those of you who don't operate in the shellfish world like Judy and I, when she referred to shoreline surveys, those are actually conducted by the state, and they are required that the towns have a shellfish survey. I think it's either every 3 or 5 years in order to run their program. So there is another official avenue for actually identifying failing septics and others, and they will put a door hanger on your doors to know that they were walking your property, and the towns usually participate in those as well. So just one more avenue that's a public and actually a state requirement.
Thanks, Jessica. And with that, we're running out of time, so I'll do our wrap up, and I also just want to emphasize that you'll have we'll send out our contact information. So if you have additional questions or thoughts or want updates on the project, please feel free to reach out to me or anyone else on the data portal team. Let me share my screen again. Okay, so I'm just going to really quickly go through what the next steps are in our process in developing the community Intertidal data portal. So this fall, through meetings like this and also individual outreach that expands on our survey work, we're gathering more input from stakeholders and filling in details. And also at the same time, Judy is working on building out the data portal. And so we're doing both things at the same time. And so hopefully by late winter or early spring 2022, we'll have additional data products decided and themes based off of the outreach that we're doing right now. More focuses and data products based around those focuses to help answer specific questions. And so once we have those developed, we'll start doing beta testing with people with all of our stakeholders. So people like you or people in the shellfish community. And so I'm hoping, like, if you're interested in being a part of that and running through some of these data products and making sure that they are intuitive and work the way you want them to, please reach out. My email is at the bottom of the screen, but there will be other opportunities to get my contact information. And then in the early summer, when we launch the data portal, we'll be holding training sessions and outreach with the final version to help make sure that people know how to use these tools that we're giving them. And I just wanted to take a moment to thank the sponsors of the Community Intertidal Data Portal. We have a Tom Glenn Fund, Community Impact Fund grant, that's a mouthful, awarded from the Island Institute. I think it's usually just called the Shore Up Fund. And then we also have a grant from the Nature Conservancy and from the Maine Coastal Community Grant Program and the Builders Initiative. And then I also wanted to recognize our fiscal sponsors, which is the Greater Portland Council of Governments and the Southern Maine Conservation Collaborative. And I just wanted to take a moment to note that if you're a person who has attended these workshops in the past or want to continue attending them in the future, since it's a quarterly series, there'll be another one coming up in the next couple of months. The topic and the exact time frame are to be decided, but you'll get more information about that when that's available. And then I just want to thank all of you for signing up for this workshop and giving such incredible feedback. And it's because of you that we can have such great discussions about these tools and about coastal issues. And that's what we want to do as the Coastal Academy. We want it to be a place to share information and yeah, make sure that we can address the issues that we need to. And also wanted to acknowledge the Casco Bay Estuary Partnership, the Greater Portland Council of Governments, the New England Environmental Finance Center, and the Cumberland County Soil and Water Conservation District for their support in coordinating and putting together these workshops. And then also mention Tidal Bay Consulting and Spatial Alternatives. Both have played an integral role in the development of the Community Intertidal Data Portal. And so I don't want to keep anybody longer than necessary, but thank you so much for sticking with us for this whole time. I know an hour-and-a-half meeting can sometimes be a little bit long, but thanks so much. And we'll follow up with a meeting summary and materials. So thank you.